This video is a forensic audit of the official story for Petra's Khazneh, where every piece of evidence they present just makes their case weaker. The official story says Petra's Khazneh is a tomb for a Nabatean king, but the main chamber, the entire point of the structure, is clinically empty. There are no inscriptions, and there is no body. This isn't just a case of missing evidence. It's a case where the absence of evidence is so complete, so total, that it becomes the primary piece of evidence against the official theory itself. They tell us the answers are just around the corner, but under a real cross-examination, their alibi completely falls apart. You cannot cheat the basic requirements of evidence. So if the story starts with a complete void where the proof should be, why are we still supposed to believe it? The most critical piece of missing evidence in any tomb is, of course, the person it was built for. The official narrative now desperately points to recent discoveries as their definitive proof, citing a 2003 crypt found beneath the facade holding 11 individuals, and a 2024 find of 12 more skeletons with some grave goods. Look, this is being presented to the public as case closed, a final validation of the tomb theory. But a simple constraint check on burial protocol and royal status reveals a glaring, frankly absurd contradiction. The main, glorious, multi-story chamber, the entire monumental purpose of the structure, remains completely, clinically empty. The only bodies found were in a cellar, a secondary crypt crudely dug out below the main attraction, almost as an afterthought. Stop buying it. So if the most important chamber is empty, and the only bodies are in the basement, who was this structure actually built for? Any practitioner in anthropology or ancient history will tell you royal burials follow an unbreakable logic of hierarchy and status. You do not bury a king in the basement. You just don't. Think about the sheer symbolic real estate. The primary chamber of Khazneh is the focus of immense artistic and engineering effort, a space designed for maximum visual impact. This is the prime location, the throne room of the afterlife. The check here is simple. Compare this arrangement to any other undisputed royal mausoleum from the period, or any period for that matter. The principal occupant always, without exception, receives the principal space. It's the entire point. Reality does not care about convenient new theories. If the king isn't in the king's room, was it ever the king's room to begin with? The official story requires us to believe they carved a masterpiece of unparalleled scale and precision for a powerful ruler like Aratus IV, and then relegated his remains, his very legacy, to a subordinate chamber underneath the main event. It's a complete logistical and symbolic inversion of every known royal burial practice across the ancient world. The story that this magnificent central hall was intended for the king, but for some reason he's not in it, is a work of pure fiction. It's a narrative designed to fit the evidence to the theory, not the other way around. What breaks first is the fundamental logic of power. You don't build a monument to your own glory and then hide your body in a utility closet. So if the bodies they found weren't the primary occupants, what does that make them? And why is the main hall still empty? The sub-chambers themselves present a serious problem for the official timeline. The assumption is that these basement crypts are contemporary with the main facade, but a proper architectural analysis would check for continuity in tooling and design. Are the carving methods in the lower crypts identical to the methods used on the main facade, and in the upper chamber. Be honest. Often in ancient sites, subordinate structures are added generations or even centuries later by different people for different purposes. This happens all the time. It's a common failure point in archaeological dating. If a forensic examination of the stone showed that the lower crypts were cut later using different tools or a lesser degree of skill, the entire argument collapses. It would mean the bodies found have no connection to the original purpose of El Khazneh. They would simply be later inhabitants squatting in the basement of an ancient, abandoned structure whose original purpose was long forgotten. You cannot cheat the timeline. So if the only bodies on site might be from a much later date, how can they be used as proof for the original function of the monument? So, let's address the primary excuse for the empty main chamber. It was looted. This is the go-to default explanation for any empty tomb anywhere in the world, and it's used to paper over a lot of inconvenient questions. But looting is a physical process, a destructive act that leaves a huge amount of physical evidence. The check is straightforward. Boots on the ground forensics. You would expect to find, and you would absolutely look for, clear signs of forced entry. You'd find broken container fragments, shattered pottery, scattered debris of low-value grave goods the thieves deemed worthless. And most importantly, you would find the tool marks left by their work. Do the simplest check. Look at the scene. Ancient looting was a brute force affair, not some kind of sterile black ops cleanup operation. So if the scene of the crime shows no signs of a break-in, was there ever a crime at all? Let's get specific on the forensic evidence you'd expect. The looting theory requires us to believe a complete fantasy where thieves were meticulously tidy. Think. In practice, looters are on a clock. They are there to smash and grab. They would shatter ceramic vessels to get at the contents, leaving behind a floor littered with potsherds. They would break open wooden chests, pry lids off stone boxes. They would leave behind scraps of textiles, bone fragments, and anything made of non-precious materials they couldn't immediately sell. The interior of El Khazneh is consistently described by observers as remarkably, almost unnaturally, pristine. There isn't even the trash you'd expect from a robbery. The absence of this low-value debris is a massive red flag. What breaks first is the excuse itself. If the thieves were so careful they left no trace, why do we call it a robbery and not a professional moving operation? The logistics of this supposed looting operation are, frankly, impossible. Think about the sheer mass involved in a royal burial of this status. We're talking about one or more stone sarcophagi, which weigh several tons apiece. Then add tons of grave goods, furniture, chests, metalwork, stone vessels, and of course, the remains themselves. Removing all of it without a trace, leaving the chamber itself completely undamaged, is a logistical fantasy. In practice, this would be a bigger, more complex construction project than the original burial. The check is to map out the required manpower and equipment. How many men would it take to haul a multi-ton stone box out of that chamber and through the narrow entrance? What kind of levers, rollers, and ropes would they need? Where are the friction marks on the floor, the chips on the door jambs from where they inevitably slipped? Stop buying it. If the robbery would have been harder than the burial, why do we assume a robbery even happened? The operation would have required a small army of workers, a temporary camp, and a significant amount of time. Reality does not care about these convenient excuses. A check on the archaeological record in the immediate vicinity should reveal evidence of the looters themselves, their campfires, their discarded tools, their food waste. A project of this magnitude, taking days if not weeks, cannot happen in a vacuum. It leaves its own footprint. Yet, no such evidence has ever been presented. We are asked to believe in a team of ghosts who moved tons of material without leaving a single mark on the building or the surrounding landscape. The story of a perfectly executed, traceless robbery of a king's tomb is more fantastic than the idea that there was never a body there to begin with. You cannot cheat the laws of physics and logistics. So, if the crime itself would have left more evidence than the original contents of the tomb, why is the crime the preferred explanation? Let's move the cross-examination from the missing contents to the scene of the crime itself, the construction. The official story claims the vast, dark interiors were painstakingly carved using simple oil lamps, which they say produce minimal soot. This convenient idea is used to explain the clean, unblackened sandstone ceilings and walls. But this explanation completely collapses the moment you apply a simple scale and resource constraint check. This wasn't a project to dig a small cave. This was a multi-generational industrial project conducted in near-total subterranean darkness. Carving a structure 130 feet high and just as deep out of solid rock requires sustained, powerful, and reliable light for literally thousands of workers for decades on end. Think about the inputs and outputs. The light is a critical input. Soot is the unavoidable output. So if the light source was fire, where is the evidence of all that fire? Do the simplest check. One single oil lamp produces a small, almost negligible amount of soot over a short period. Fine. But what about 10,000 oil lamps burning 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for 20 or 30 years? Look, soot is cumulative. The particulate matter would be absolutely immense. It's a simple calculation of fuel consumption and byproduct generation. That volume of smoke would coat every single surface in a thick, greasy, stubborn layer of black. Any practitioner who's dealt with fire restoration will tell you that soot gets into every porous surface and is incredibly difficult to remove completely. You cannot just wipe it off sandstone. The idea that these walls were ever exposed to decades of industrial-level smoke and came out clean is a chemical and physical impossibility. So if the evidence of the fire is missing, what does that tell us about the fire itself? The apologists suggest sandstone shedding and regular maintenance somehow cleaned it all away. Be honest. Does sandstone shed from a protected interior ceiling at a rate fast enough to erase decades of industrial-level soot deposition? A geologist would laugh at the suggestion. The rate of natural spalling in a protected environment like that is measured in millimeters per century, if that. And who, exactly, was the maintenance crew tasked with scrubbing the ceilings of a 100-foot-high chamber in the dark while thousands of tons of rock were being chipped away all around them? It's utter nonsense. The logistics of the cleaning operation are more absurd than the construction itself. What breaks first is the ventilation system, which doesn't exist. You cannot cheat the physics of combustion and accumulation. So if there's no evidence of the fire needed to provide the light, how in the world did they see what they were carving? The problem isn't just soot. It's the air itself. The check here is basic human biology. Thousands of open flames, plus the intense physical exertion of thousands of workers, all inside a massive but poorly ventilated rock cavity, would consume the available oxygen at an astonishing rate. The buildup of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide would be rapid and lethal. Any practitioner who has worked in confined spaces like a miner or a tunnel engineer, will tell you that ventilation is the single most critical life support system. It's not an option, it's a fundamental requirement. Without a massive, engineered ventilation system, which we see no evidence for, the work site would have been a death trap within hours. Workers would be collapsing from hypoxia. The oil lamp theory isn't just messy, it's physically unsurvivable on the scale required. So if the official light source would have made the work site lethal, what was the real light source? Now, let's put the tools themselves under pressure. The apologists for the official story insist on the almost superhuman capabilities of the Nabatean craftsmen. They argue that the incredible, almost alien precision of Khazneh, with cuts and surfaces that look almost machined, were achieved with simple, hand-forged iron chisels and abrasives on so-called soft sandstone. They just call it expert craftsmanship, and leave it at that. But this lazy explanation completely ignores the fundamental constraints of tools and materials. Any machinist, any stonemason, any fabricator will tell you the same thing. Your final product can only be as precise as the tools you use to make it, and, just as important, the system you use to measure and guide those tools. You cannot cheat the limits of your equipment. A hand tool produces a hand finish. Period. The check is to perform a detailed analysis of the tooling marks, or rather, the lack of them. Under a microscope, or even with a raking light, does a handheld iron chisel striking soft, friable sandstone leave a perfectly smooth, planar surface across hundreds of square feet? Absolutely not. It leaves chatter marks, it leaves inconsistencies, it leaves the telltale signs of thousands of individual impacts. To achieve the kind of geometric perfection we see at Khazneh, the vast, flat plains, the perfect radii, the crisp, unerring lines, across a surface area of thousands of square feet, requires a system of reference points and guides that is itself almost perfectly rigid and accurate. This is a systems-level problem. Think about the cumulative error. Over a span of 100 feet, a tiny 1-degree mistake in your angle at the beginning becomes a massive, visible deviation at the end. The failure modes are everywhere. One bad swing, one cracked corner, and the perfect symmetry is ruined forever. This isn't just good craftsmanship. This is a fundamentally different process. So if iron chisels can't possibly account for the finish and precision, what tool was actually used? Let's dig into the material itself. Sandstone is considered a soft rock, which is true relative to granite, but this is misleading. The check is to look at the properties of the material on a granular level. Sandstone is an abrasive. Carving it is like trying to machine a giant block of sandpaper. The tool wear would be astronomical. An iron chisel would lose its edge after just a few minutes of work. This means a constant industrial-scale process of resharpening and reforging thousands upon thousands of tools every single day. This is a massive logistical operation in itself. Where are the forges? Where are the mountains of charcoal needed to fuel them? Where are the discarded, worn-out tools? An operation of this scale would leave a massive archaeological footprint of tool maintenance, and it simply hasn't been found. We're asked to believe in the finished product without any of the required industrial support infrastructure. It's like finding a skyscraper in the desert, but no sign of a steel mill or a concrete plant. Stop buying it. So, if the tools for the job would have created their own mountain of evidence, and that evidence is missing, what does that tell us about the tools? Furthermore, the consistency of the tool marks, or the lack thereof, implies a tool that was indifferent to the material. A real-world check on sandstone reveals it's not homogeneous. It has layers, harder inclusions, and faults. A hand chisel behaves differently when it hits a harder nodule of iron or silica. The mason has to adjust. The tool can skip. The finish becomes uneven. Yet the surfaces at Khazneh are relentlessly, impossibly consistent. They flow over the material's natural variations as if they weren't there. This suggests a removal process that wasn't based on mechanical impact and chipping. Any stonemason will tell you that you work with the stone, you follow its weaknesses. This was different. This was something that imposed its will on the stone. So if the tool wasn't affected by the material it was cutting, what kind of tool could it have been? Let's talk about motive, the why of it all. The entire tomb narrative is anchored to one specific man, the Nabatean king, Aretas IV. The official story claims the dating is based on stylistic elements of the architecture, the columns, the capitals, and its physical proximity to other, smaller crypts that have been dated to the 1st century. Okay, let's apply real pressure to this line of reasoning. Is stylistic similarity absolute proof of purpose and origin? And is being built next to a cemetery proof that you are also part of that cemetery? The check is just basic logic. You can build a modern, high-tech power station right next to a historic 18th century church. That does not make the power station a religious monument from the 18th century. Proximity is not causation, and style is not substance. It's circumstantial evidence at best, and it's being presented as a slam-dunk case. Why is the bar for evidence so low here? The most glaring, unbelievable hole in the motive is the one thing every other royal monument in human history has in abundance: a name. There is no inscription on Khazneh, not a single carving, not a single piece of text that says, "This is the eternal resting place of the great Aretas IV, king of the Nabateans." Think. Monuments of this scale are, at their core, propaganda. They are billboards of power, statements of legacy meant to awe citizens and intimidate rivals. For a king to commission the most spectacular, expensive, and labor-intensive structure in his entire kingdom, and then forget to put his name on it, is not just atypical, it's utterly inconceivable. It defies the primary, fundamental incentive for building such a thing in the first place. You build it to be remembered. Who benefits from a massive, anonymous monument? Not a king who wants his name to echo through eternity. It's a complete contradiction in motive. So if it wasn't built to glorify a specific king, what on earth was its real purpose? The narrative of expert craftsmen with simple tools also conveniently requires us to ignore the sheer industrial scale of the waste removal. We're not talking about a few cartloads of rock. We are talking about the removal, transportation, and disposal of hundreds of thousands of tons of sandstone. A simple constraint check on the logistics of this operation is required, and it's a check the official story fails completely. Where did all the rock go? Every cubic meter of rock carved out of that cliff face becomes at least a cubic meter, and likely more, of rubble, gravel, and dust that must be physically transported away from the site. This process, which is effectively quarrying in place, generates enormous spoil heaps. We should be able to find them. Geologists and archaeologists are very good at identifying large, man-made mounds of homogeneous rock debris. These are not subtle features in the landscape. So where is the mountain of missing rock? Think of it like a modern mining operation. The waste material, the tailings, has to go somewhere, and it stays there. The volume of the empty space of Khazneh's chambers and facade can be calculated with reasonable accuracy. That volume of solid rock, when broken into rubble, expands in volume, a phenomenon known as the swell factor. So you're looking for a pile of debris that is even larger than the hole that was created. That material had to be moved, carted, and dumped. Yet, there are no corresponding spoil heaps in the vicinity of Petra that can account for the construction of Khazneh, let alone all the other massive monuments carved from the cliffs. The waste material has, for all practical purposes, vanished. This is an impossible logistical feat. It's like demolishing a 50-story skyscraper and coming back the next day to find not a single truckload of rubble. Reality does not care. You cannot cheat the law of conservation of mass. So if the primary evidence of its construction is completely missing, how can we possibly trust the official story of its construction? The bottleneck for this impossible operation is the Seek itself, the narrow canyon that serves as the main entrance to Petra. It's a key logistical constraint. Let's run the numbers, conceptually. Hundreds of thousands of tons of rock, moved by animal-drawn carts. How many carts per day could even fit through that narrow passage, competing with regular commercial traffic, water carriers, and people? A practitioner in logistics would map this out. The traffic jam would be permanent. It would have taken centuries. The check is a simple throughput analysis. The official story requires an industrial-scale quarrying operation to be conducted through a single-lane road. The entire project would grind to a halt. What breaks first is the supply line, or in this case, the waste removal line. The physical geography of the site makes the official construction story a non-starter. So if the rock couldn't have been removed in the way they suggest, how was it actually done? And this leads to the biggest question of all. Who were these builders? The official story credits the Nabateans. The Nabateans were, by all historical accounts, a remarkable people. They were masters of commerce, they were traders, and they were brilliant water management engineers in the harsh desert environment. But they were not known for a pre-existing tradition of monumental stone carving on this level. Nothing in their history suggests they had these skills. The creation of Khazneh represents a quantum leap in technology and artistic skill that appears in the archaeological record almost out of nowhere, fully formed. A perfect masterpiece without any preceding prototypes or practice runs. The check is to look for the evolution of the craft. Where are the smaller, less perfect, beta versions of Khazneh? Where are the failed attempts, the learning curve projects? They don't exist. This is like finding a modern smartphone in a box of stone tools. It makes no sense. Great technological and artistic traditions do not just spring into existence overnight. They grow, they evolve, they are refined over generations. There is always a learning curve. We see it with the pyramids in Egypt, which evolved from simple mastabas to step pyramids, and finally to the true pyramids at Giza. We see it in the evolution of Greek temples. Here, there is no curve. It's as if a group of desert merchants suddenly, spontaneously, acquired the skills of the world's greatest stonemasons, architects, and engineers, built a wonder of the world that would challenge even modern builders. And then, the knowledge just vanished. Be honest. A society that can build this can build anything. Why did this incredible technology not proliferate? Why was it not used to build their cities, their palaces, their fortifications? On a similar scale. The knowledge transfer failed completely, which strongly suggests the knowledge may never have been theirs to begin with. It's a technological dead end. So if the Nabateans didn't build it, who did? Now we have to move the cross-examination to a critical detail that is often dismissed in the official story as just a picturesque inconvenience: the local environment. Petra is located in a narrow canyon system, with the main entrance, the Seek, acting as a natural funnel for flash floods. We have modern records and historical accounts of these floods being incredibly powerful, sudden, and destructive. The official story asks us to believe that the Nabateans, renowned water management experts, chose to build their king's most important monument, a structure meant to last for all eternity, directly in the path of a recurring and predictable natural disaster, without any apparent large-scale mitigation. A simple risk assessment check, something any modern civil engineer would do on day one, would have red flagged this location immediately as fundamentally unsafe for a permanent, high-value structure. It's an act of profound engineering malpractice, unless that wasn't the point. So why build your most important tomb in a flood zone? But what if we've been looking at it completely backwards? What if the design of El Khazneh isn't just ignoring the water, but is, in fact, designed to interact with it? Look closely at the facade, not as a piece of art, but as a piece of engineering. There are numerous elements that can be interpreted not as decoration, but as functional channels, basins, and conduits. The entire plaza in front of it seems to be engineered to manage, channel, and perhaps even utilize water flow. Was this vulnerability to flooding a bug, or was it a feature? A practitioner in hydrology or fluid dynamics would analyze the entire system not as a building threatened by water, but perhaps as a machine that was powered by it. The official narrative of a tomb has no logical explanation for why you would place it in such a high risk zone. It treats the location as a beautiful but deeply flawed choice. But what if the location was chosen not for its beauty, but for its specific hydraulic function? So if the design appears to deliberately accommodate the greatest local environmental threat, was it ever a tomb at all? This brings us to the interior, which is perhaps the most bizarre part of the entire structure. The official story labels the massive, empty, box-like inner chambers as spaces for funerary rituals. This is a convenient, catch-all term that archaeologists use for any ancient space whose actual function they do not understand. But these rooms have highly specific and very, very unusual acoustic properties. The check here is simple physics, a field of study called archaeoacoustics. You can go into these rooms with modern equipment and measure their resonant frequency. The chambers of El Khazneh are not just random empty boxes. The evidence suggests they are engineered to amplify sound, to resonate powerfully at specific low frequencies. The surfaces are unnaturally smooth. The corners are precise. The dimensions are not random. All factors that critically affect the acoustic properties of a space. You cannot get these results by accident. It's an engineered outcome. To dismiss this as a mere byproduct of carving a room for chanting is to completely ignore the sheer level of engineering and effort required to achieve these results. It's like looking at a finely crafted violin and saying its shape is just a coincidence, and that it wasn't specifically designed to make music. Think about the energy and time required to carve these chambers with such acoustic precision. Why would you invest that much effort? What kind of ritual requires a perfectly tuned, resonant chamber? There is no text, no inscription, no historical account that tells us. The ritual explanation is simply an admission of ignorance. But if we stop thinking of it as a ceremonial space and start thinking of it as a piece of functional hardware, the acoustics suddenly become the main feature, not a bug. They suggest a purpose related to vibration, frequency, and energy. So if the chambers are designed and built like a machine, what was that machine designed to do? Finally, let's put all the pieces on the table and look at the whole picture. The official story proposes a sudden, unexplained, and isolated leap in technological capability. A society of traders and nomads, without a known history of large-scale stonework, spontaneously develops the ability to create a monument of breathtaking, machine-like precision and industrial scale. They supposedly do this in a complete logistical black hole. No clear evidence of the massive workforce, the supply chains for food and water, the tool-making forges, or the mountains of waste rock that such a project would inevitably create. They build this masterpiece, allegedly for their king, but then neglect to put his name anywhere on it, the single most important feature of any royal monument. And then, most critically, the knowledge, the technology, the entire skill set vanishes without a trace. There are no other structures like Khazneh. The technology is a complete dead end. Do the simplest check. Does this sound like history, or does it sound like a myth? A historian or an anthropologist would perform a simple check on this narrative. Does this pattern of technological appearance and disappearance match anything we know about how human cultures develop and transmit knowledge? The answer is an emphatic no. Technology evolves, it spreads, it leaves a legacy of tools and techniques. It doesn't just appear for one single project and then completely evaporate. This isn't a story of cultural achievement. It's the story of a technological anomaly. It is a ghost in the machine of history. You cannot cheat the fundamental rules of cultural and technological transmission. The entire official narrative is a collection of special exceptions to the rule, a long string of just so stories that fall apart under the slightest forensic pressure. So if the story of how it was built is a complete fiction, what is the truth? The official account of Khazneh as a tomb built by first-century Nabatean nomads with simple iron chisels has failed every single constraint-based check we have applied to it. It is a story that is profoundly inconsistent with the physical evidence on the site, with the laws of physics, and with the logistical realities of the ancient world. It requires us to believe in surgically precise looters, sootless industrial fires, impossibly perfect craftsmen using inadequate tools, mountains of rock that vanished into thin air, and a king who didn't want credit for the greatest monument of his age. It's time to consider what the evidence actually points to. even if that conclusion is uncomfortable for the mainstream. Let's look at the alternative hypothesis. This is labeled as a hypothesis because it is not proven, but it fits the physical constraints and the observed evidence far better than the official story ever could. The hypothesis is that El Khazneh was not a tomb, but some kind of advanced power plant. Machine designed to harness geological or telluric energy. This framework suggests it was built to function as a high-frequency resonator, using the natural properties of the sandstone and the powerful channeled flow of water during floods to generate a form of energy. This single model would elegantly explain the machine-like precision, the strange and powerful resonant chambers, the critical water management features of the location, and, most importantly, the complete lack of inscriptions or burials. Because it was never a monument to a person. It was a piece of functional infrastructure. The verdict after this cross-examination is clear. The official narrative that El Khazneh is a simple tomb for a king remains profoundly and demonstrably insufficient. It fails to account for the missing body in the primary chamber, the complete absence of industrial soot, the impossible precision of the tool marks, the lack of any royal inscription, the missing mountains of spoil heaps, and the highly specific, over-engineered, resonant properties of the interior chambers. The official story is a collection of convenient fictions, a flimsy narrative designed to protect a comfortable and simple paradigm. But it completely crumbles under real forensic pressure. It is an alibi, not an explanation. The evidence does not support the verdict of a tomb. We have only scratched the surface of the anomalies at Petra and the questions they raise. If you want more forensic breakdowns that pressure test the official stories we are all told, subscribe for the full investigation.